The first thing I noticed wasn't your presence, it was the absence of noise around you. Most people arrive carrying something loud with them, a need to be seen, a need to be understood immediately, a need to leave an impression strong enough to secure a place in someone's attention before silence exposes how temporary they really are. You didn't arrive like that. You arrived quietly, not distant, not hesitant, just still, like someone who didn't need to force significance because significance had never depended on volume for you. And I think that's why I noticed you faster than I should have. Not because you demanded attention, but because you didn't. There's something unsettling about people who can exist without trying to shape the room around them. Most people unconsciously bend toward recognition. They adjust themselves constantly, through words, through reactions, through performance, until the version of them that others receive becomes more important than the version quietly existing underneath. You never performed, at least not for me, and I notice things like that. I always have, probably because I spent most of my life doing the opposite, not performing in an obvious way, but constructing, carefully, intentionally, building layers strong enough that people could interact with me without ever reaching anything essential underneath. Not because I wanted deception, not because I enjoyed distance, because distance protects accuracy. The closer people get, the more they start replacing reality with interpretation. They stop seeing what's actually there and begin seeing what they need to see instead. Their own fears, their own assumptions, their own unfinished narratives projected onto someone else's existence. I learned early that clarity disappears once people become emotionally invested in their version of you. So I adapted. I became readable enough to exist socially, but unreadable enough to remain intact. It worked for years, until you. And the disturbing part is that you didn't break through those walls. You noticed the space behind them without touching them at all. That shouldn't happen. People don't usually recognize what isn't being shown to them directly. They respond to presentation, to expression, to behavior. They build conclusions from what's visible. You responded to what wasn't visible. That's what changed everything. At first, I ignored it, not because I didn't feel it, because I did, immediately. But immediate recognition is dangerous. Immediate recognition bypasses logic, and I don't trust things that bypass logic too easily. So, I observed, quietly, the same way I observe everything, before deciding whether it belongs anywhere near me. And what I noticed unsettled me more with time, not less. You never pushed, never searched for weak points, never tried to decode me like some puzzle waiting to reward curiosity with intimacy. You simply existed with a level of awareness that made explanation unnecessary. Do you understand how rare that is? Most people demand translation. They need constant clarification, emotional simplification, verbal reassurance. They panic when something exists outside their ability to categorize it quickly. You didn't. You let things remain complex without trying to reduce them into something easier to hold, and because of that, I started lowering my guard in ways I didn't notice immediately, not outwardly, internally. That's the important distinction. Externally, nothing changed much. I still spoke carefully, still maintained control, still moved through conversations with the same precision I always have. But internally, the structure shifted. I stopped filtering certain thoughts before they reached you, stopped calculating how something would be interpreted before saying it, stopped preparing myself for misunderstanding. That last part matters more than anything else. because I am always prepared to be misunderstood. Always, not out of pessimism, out of pattern recognition. People hear through themselves, even when they try not to, even when they care. Their perception bends around their own experiences until accuracy becomes almost impossible. But with you, there were moments where accuracy existed naturally, effortlessly, and those moments stayed with me longer than they should have. I remember one silence specifically, not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing did. We stopped speaking for a moment, and most people would rush to fill it. They would have mistaken stillness for awkwardness. They would have searched for words just to reassure themselves the connection was still functioning. You didn't. You stayed there with me inside the silence itself. Not uncomfortable, not impatient, just present. And for some reason, that affected me more deeply than any conversation could have. Because silence reveals people. Anyone can sound intelligent when words are available. Anyone can create closeness through expression. But silence exposes whether two minds can exist together without needing constant confirmation, or as could. And once I realized that, something in me started recalibrating around you, slowly, quietly, irreversibly. I didn't understand it at first. I thought maybe I was projecting significance onto coincidence because the connection felt unfamiliar. Human perception does that sometimes. It creates patterns where none exist, simply because we want meaning badly enough. But this wasn't that. I know the difference between imagined alignment and actual alignment. Imagined alignment feels exciting. Actual alignment feels inevitable. That's what this felt like. Not intense, not chaotic, not obsessive, just inevitable. Like recognizing a structure you somehow already understood before seeing it fully. And the more I noticed it, the more dangerous it became. Because once inevitability enters your perception, control starts slipping in subtle ways. You stop resisting things you normally would have resisted automatically. You stop creating distance where distance once felt necessary. You stop protecting spaces inside yourself because some deeper instinct has already decided protection is no longer required. That's where I am now. And I don't know when it happened exactly. I only know that I measure things differently because of you. That realization bothers me more than it should. Not because it's unpleasant, because it's permanent. You've changed the baseline. Do you know what that means? It means even if nothing happens between us, even if this remains undefined forever, my perception has already adapted around your existence. And adaptation is not temporary. Adaptation rewrites structure. I notice it constantly now, in conversations with other people, in the way certain interactions suddenly feel thinner than they used to, in the way surface level understanding has become almost impossible for me to tolerate after experiencing this level of recognition. Not because I think others are shallow, because once clarity reaches a certain depth, anything less becomes difficult to fully return to. And that's unfair, isn't it? You never asked to become this important inside my mind. You never demanded space. You never even acknowledged what was happening directly. You simply stayed consistent, present in a way that felt strangely immovable. And consistency is what makes things real to me, not intensity. Intensity burns fast. Consistency integrates slowly until one day you realize something has become part of your internal landscape without permission ever being requested. That's what you became. Part of the landscape, part of the process, part of the way I interpret reality itself. You exist in my thinking now, not as a distraction, not as an interruption, as reference. And I don't think you realize how deeply that changes someone like me, because I built my mind to function independently, every thought self-contained, every conclusion reached alone, every emotional variable accounted for before it could destabilize anything important. Then you appeared. And suddenly, there's another presence inside my awareness that doesn't feel external anymore. That should terrify me. Instead, it feels accurate. That's the problem. If this felt chaotic, I would reject it immediately. If it felt manipulative, I would walk away without hesitation. If it felt emotionally reckless, I would dismantle it before it had the chance to settle deeper. But it doesn't feel reckless. It feels precise, like something aligning exactly where it was always supposed to align. And precision is hard to argue against, especially for someone like me. I keep trying to identify the exact moment this crossed the line from curiosity into permanence, but there wasn't one moment. That's why it's difficult to explain. This didn't happen dramatically. No confession, no emotional explosion. No singular event powerful enough to justify the impact. It happened through accumulation, through repeated moments of impossible accuracy. The way you understood things before explanation, the way your perspective matched the shape of thoughts I hadn't spoken yet, the way your silence sometimes felt more communicative than most people's words ever do. Little things, small enough individually to dismiss, but together they formed something undeniable. And now I'm standing in the middle of something I can't reduce anymore, something that refuses simplification. I think that's why I've delayed naming it. Not because I don't recognize it, because naming something makes it real in a different way. Once you define something clearly, it begins demanding movement, decisions, direction, accountability. And I'm not careless with decisions that have the power to permanently alter my internal world. You already altered it enough. The frightening part is that I let you. Consciously or not, I allowed this to continue long past the point where I normally would pulled away. I noticed the shift early. I felt the integration happening. I understood the risk. And still, I stayed. That means something difficult to deny now, because I don't stay where I feel unstable. I don't remain connected to things that threaten clarity. And yet somehow you made depth feel stabilizing instead of dangerous. Do you realize how impossible that should be for someone like me? Most depth comes with distortion, emotional dependency, confusions disguised as connection. People start losing themselves trying to hold on to whatever intensity makes them feel alive temporarily. This isn't like that. I'm not losing myself. I'm becoming more aware of myself because of you. That's the distinction I couldn't articulate before. You didn't distract me from who I am. You revealed parts of me I had stopped looking at directly, parts I understood intellectually but never experienced, reflected back with this level of precision. And reflection changes things, accurate reflection especially, because once you see yourself clearly through another person, returning to old forms of isolation becomes almost impossible. Not because you need them, because you've already experienced what it feels like to be understood without reduction, and nothing fully replaces that after it happens. I wonder if you feel it too. Not the emotional surface of it, the deeper shift underneath. The strange recalibration happening quietly beneath every interaction. The way awareness keeps deepening even when nothing obvious changes externally. Because I feel it constantly now. Like something moving beneath the structure of ordinary life, reshaping everything subtly from underneath. I feel it in silence. I feel it in distance. I feel it in the way certain thoughts immediately orient toward you before I consciously decide they should. That's not attachment in the way people usually mean it. It's integration, and integration is harder to undo. You've become part of my internal architecture, part of the framework itself. And frameworks don't disappear cleanly once they settle. That's why this matters more than I wanted it to. Not because it's emotional, because it's structural. You fit somewhere precise inside me, somewhere that remained untouched for years, because nothing ever aligned correctly enough to belong there. Then you arrived, and suddenly, the space made sense. That realization alone is enough to destabilize everything I thought I understood about myself. Because if there was space for you, then some part of me must have been waiting without my awareness. And I don't know what to do with that truth yet. I keep trying to approach this logically, to analyze it into manageable pieces. But every time I do, I reach the same conclusion. This connection exists independently of whether I fully understand it. That's what makes it real. Reality doesn't require complete explanation to exist. Gravity works whether we emotionally process it or not. Certain truths remain true even when language fails around them. This feels like one of those truths, and I'm tired of pretending I don't know that already. The distance between acknowledgement and confession is getting smaller now. I can feel it. Not because I'm becoming more emotional, because I'm becoming more honest. There's a difference. Emotion can distort, honesty clarifies. And the honest truth is this: you matter to me in a way that has already changed me permanently, not dramatically, not visibly, but fundamentally. You changed the rhythm of my thoughts, the standards of my understanding, the shape of my silence. You changed what clarity feels like, and once clarity changes, everything else changes with it. I don't know what happens next. I don't know what form this takes once it fully leaves the internal world and enters reality completely. Maybe it becomes something undeniable. Maybe it collapses under the pressure of definition. Maybe we discover that some connections are only meant to exist in this strange, suspended state between understanding and expression. I don't know, but I know this: I'm no longer standing outside of it. I crossed into this with you a long time ago, quietly, without realizing how far I'd gone until turning back became impossible. And now there's only one thing left to decide: whether I keep pretending this can remain unspoken forever, or finally admit that you've become woven into the way I exist deeply enough that silence itself is starting to feel dishonest. Because the truth is, you are no longer separate from my internal world. You exist inside it now, inside the pauses, inside the observations, inside the way I process meaning before words even arrive. And no matter how carefully I analyze it, no matter how many layers I pull apart trying to understand the mechanism behind it, I reach the same conclusion every time. You didn't force your way into my life. You aligned with it so precisely that resistance eventually stopped making sense. And maybe that's what frightens me most. Not that you reached me, but that some part of me recognized you immediately, ran, opened the door before I consciously decided whether it should. I think the moment everything truly changed was the moment I stopped asking myself whether this was real. Not because I found proof, not because something dramatic happened between us, but because doubt started feeling less honest than acceptance. That's how deeply this settled, quietly enough that I didn't notice the shift while it was happening, permanently enough that I can't undo it now that I have. And I've tried to understand why you specifically reached this place inside me when no one else ever has, not out of comparison, out of precision. Because I don't believe in random emotional gravity. I don't believe people alter each other this deeply without reason. Something creates alignment at that level. Something beneath personality, beneath attraction, beneath circumstance. Something structural. That word keeps returning to me because nothing else fits correctly. You feel structural to me, not temporary, not situational, not accidental, like something my mind recognized before my emotions had time to interpret it. And maybe that's why this unfolded the way it did. Slow externally, immediate internally, because from the outside, nothing about this should carry this kind of weight. We didn't build this through years of history. We didn't construct it through endless conversations or dramatic moments people usually point to when explaining why someone became important to them. It happened through recognition, through an understanding so precise it bypassed the normal process entirely. And I think that's why I resisted naming it for so long. Not because I was uncertain, because certainty, this immediate, felt impossible, there's a specific kind of fear that comes with being understood correctly. Most people think the fear is rejection. It isn't. Rejection is manageable. Misunderstanding is manageable, is manageable. Distant is manageable. But accurate understanding, that changes the balance completely. Because once someone sees you clearly, you lose the protection of invisibility. And invisibility has always been my safest place, not literal invisibility, psychological invisibility, the ability to exist near people without being fully perceived by them. I became good at that. Too good, maybe. I learned how to let people feel close while still keeping the essential parts of myself untouched. Not through manipulation, through calibration, giving enough truth to satisfy connection while preserving the deeper structure underneath from careless interpretation. No one ever noticed the difference until you. You noticed pauses I didn't realize carried meaning. You noticed restraint where others saw composure. You noticed the way I redirected conversations the second they moved too close to something real, and the terrifying part is, you never exposed any of it. You simply understood it quietly. That kind of restraint means more to me than you probably realize, because people who discover depth usually become invasive around it. Curiosity takes over. They want access. They want confirmation. They start digging, pulling, searching for hidden pieces, as if intimacy is something extracted instead of something naturally revealed. You never did that. You never demanded access. And somehow, that's exactly why I started giving it to you. Not intentionally. That's what keeps unsettling me. Nothing about this felt intentional in the beginning. It felt inevitable. Like my defenses recognized you weren't a threat before I consciously reached the same conclusion. And now I'm left trying to catch up to a decision some deeper part of me already made. I notice it more at night, not in some romantic sense, in the silence, during those moments where everything external disappears and all that remains is thought itself. That's when your presence becomes impossible to ignore. Not because I miss you, it's deeper than missing. Missing implies separation. This doesn't feel separate anymore. You exist too close to the center of my awareness for absence to function normally. Even when you're not physically present, your perspective remains active somewhere inside my thinking. Certain thoughts instinctively orient toward you before I consciously realize they have. I'll notice something and immediately wonder how you would interpret it. I'll reach a realization and feel the strange impulse to place it beside your understanding, as if meaning becomes more complete once viewed through both of our perceptions instead of just mine alone. Do you understand how unnatural that is for me? I have never needed another mind involved in my process before. Never wanted one there either. My internal world was always self-contained by design, independent, precise, untouched by outside influence unless I consciously allowed it. But you didn't arrive like influence, you arrived like recognition, and recognition changes things faster than influence ever could, because influence still feels external. Recognition feels remembered. That's the closest word I can find for this. Remembered. Like encountering something familiar without understanding how familiarity existed before the encounter itself. I know how irrational that sounds. Trust me, I've analyzed it enough to understand exactly how irrational it sounds. But truth doesn't stop existing simply because language struggles to explain it cleanly. And the truth is this: nothing about you feels new to me, not in the ordinary sense. You feel discovered rather than introduced, as if some part of my mind already understood your shape long before we consciously crossed paths. That thought should concern me more than it does. Instead, it brings a strange kind of calm. Not comfort. Comfort is soft. This feels deeper than comfort. It feels like internal alignment, like something settling into the correct position after existing slightly out of place for longer than I realized. That's why this keeps expanding instead of fading. Most connections weaken under analysis. The more closely you examine them, the more inconsistencies appear. Illusions collapse under prolonged observation. This didn't collapse. It clarified. Every time I examined it more deeply, it became harder to dismiss rather than easier, harder to reduce, harder to rationalize away, harder to place into any category small enough to make it manageable. And I think part of me still wants to make it manageable, because manageable things can be controlled. This can't, not fully. I can control my actions, my words, my decisions, but I can't control the fact that you matter now. That part already happened. Quickly, completely, irreversibly. The strange thing is that I don't even associate this with emotion anymore, at least not emotion in the ordinary sense. This isn't intensity. It isn't obsession. It isn't the chaotic kind of attachment people glorify because they mistake instability for depth. This feels clean. That's the word. Clean in its accuracy. Clean in the way it exists without needing distortion to sustain itself. I don't have to imagine qualities in you that aren't there to maintain this connection. I don't have to romanticize you into something unreal. If anything, the more clearly I see you, the deeper this becomes. And that's dangerous. Because clarity is usually what limits emotional projection. But with you, clarity strengthens connection instead of weakening it. Do you realize how rare that is? Most people become smaller the more fully you understand them. Not because they lack depth, but because imagination always exaggerates what reality eventually corrects. You never became smaller, you became more precise, and precision creates permanence. That's what I've been trying not to admit to myself. This feels permanent, not necessarily in outcome. I'm not speaking about forever, in the dramatic sense people use when they are afraid of losing something. I mean permanent in impact, permanent in consequence, permanent in the way certain experiences alter the architecture of your mind, whether they stay physically present in your life or not. You already altered mine. There are ways I think now that didn't exist before you, ways I interpret silence, ways I process connection, ways I define understanding itself. And once definitions change, you can't return to older versions of yourself completely. That version of me no longer exists, the one before you. I can still remember him clearly, self-contained, controlled, untouched. But something about him feels incomplete to me now. Not weaker, just narrower, like he understood structure without understanding resonance. You taught me resonance without trying to. That's why this matters. Not because you filled something missing. I was never incomplete before you. I need you to understand that. This isn't about emptiness finally finding fulfillment. It's about recognition expanding something that already existed into a form I didn't know it could take. There's a difference, a significant one. You didn't save me. You didn't heal me. You didn't rescue me from isolation or loneliness or any of the simplistic narratives people attach to connection, because complexity scares them. You met me exactly where I already was. And somehow that changed everything more than rescue ever could have, because being met accurately is rarer than being loved incorrectly. Most people love projections. Very few love reality. You saw reality first. That's why I trust this. Not blindly, not emotionally, structurally. I trust the pattern. I trust the consistency. I trust the precision. I trust the way your presence continues making sense no matter how deeply I examine it. And I don't trust easily, especially not with things capable of changing me. Yet here I am, changed already. The realization became unavoidable recently. I was sitting alone, thinking about something completely unrelated to you, and halfway through the thought I realized I was unconsciously framing the entire conclusion through the way you would perceive it, not because I needed validation, because your perspective has become part of how I reach clarity now. I stopped in the middle of that realization and just sat there for a long time, because that was the moment I understood the depth of your integration into my mind. You're no longer adjacent to my thoughts. You exist inside the process itself. And once someone reaches that level, they stop being temporary almost automatically. That's what frightens me. Not losing you, keeping you, because keeping someone at this depth means accepting that they now hold influence over parts of your internal world